Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Wednesday, and that means Epic Comic Book Wednesday, when Michael K. Vaughan and I combine the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage to examine the comic books on which we have wasted our youths, and, I might add, significant chunks of our adulthood, which impinges on our subject today. The subject today is not an individual comic or a run of comics, but rather reprint culture in comics, in the big two superhero publishers, Marvel and DC, to be specific, and how they react to the fact that they have been producing comics for decades. Once upon a time, comics were viewed as ephemera. They weren't something that you remembered. They weren't something that you certainly kept or ever reprinted or referred to again. They were just here today and gone tomorrow. But then they developed fandom. And the fandom was thinking, well, my older brother loved this particular comic book, and I'm coming into it, and I would love to read some of the older issues, but he threw them out when he was done with them. So where can I find them? For a long time, there was nowhere that you could find them. Until DC Comics and then Marvel Comics figured out that that's a marketing opportunity. That's a chance to sell the same product more than once. And they set about industriously offering reprints to their readers. In addition to ongoing titles, there would be reprint specials, sometimes whole reprint titles, to keep your readership hooked in, to keep them informed. The more deeply they go into the lore of your title, the reasoning was, the more likely they are to stick around, the more likely they are to become lifelong fans. So I have a whole bunch of different examples of that. Like, for instance, one of the first comic books ever to develop that kind of fandom, a kind of fandom that organized itself out of a love of this comic. Not comics in general, but the world of this particular comic. One of the first groups to ever do that was the fandom of the Legion of Superheroes. Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes. Long, long time ago, the character of Superboy, Clark Kent, when he was a teenager in Smallville, encounters three superpowered teenagers from 1,000 years in the future, where they are part of a super group called the Legion of Superheroes. And eventually he starts traveling through time to join them in their adventures. The fandom for that series, for the appearances of the Legion, and then regular appearances of the Legion, then a regular backup story of the Legion, then the Legion's own comic, they were pretty vocal. It was pretty obvious to the tough, experienced businessmen, middle-aged businessmen who were running DC Comics at the time, that could be capitalized on. It's led to the Legion having a number of their own issues over time, and it also led to a number of reprints. This thing is from, for instance, I think the 1970s. Since it's Ernie Chan cover, I'm assuming it's the 1970s. You're going to tell me? Yes, the 1970s. This is one random, this is DC Superstars, but this is an issue of theirs where they reprint a few Legion of Superhero issues. So this is a newly commissioned cover, but all the stories on the inside are old. They're all classic adventures from Adventure Comics that perhaps readers in the 70s would not have had access to. They wouldn't have been able to see it. They might have had reference to some of these earlier stories, but they wouldn't have been able to read them themselves. So you give them this. Back when the back issue market had to be done by mail, or ads in the back of phone books or whatever, buy somebody's collection, $5 for 500 issues, something like that. You never knew what you were going to get. This was a lot more reliable, and it was also wherever you got your comics. And years and years, decades later, you have the same thing. Again, just a big reprint volume of Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, where you get all of these older stories. In fact, these two volumes have one story in common, even though they're separated by 50 years. So that is one way to do it. This is relatively recent. This volume came out in, let's see here. Do we even know? Are you even going to tell me? Sometimes not. Sometimes this has the copyright information for all of the issues that are reprinted in here, but not for the reprint volume itself. Probably that's germane, since DC can't copyright Superboy anymore. So maybe that's germane. But that's one example. Then earlier and earlier than that, in the 60s and 70s, DC Comics did a lot of their titles metamorphosed briefly into big 100-page giants where you got a lot of comic for 60 cents. Now, 60 cents at the time was a lot. That was a week's pay. But you got a lot for that money. Things like this. 100-page giants where you have Joe Kubert artwork on the cover. Not just for... There is a new Tarzan adventure at the beginning of this issue that's never been seen before. It is Joe Kubert artwork. It was ongoing from his run on Tarzan for DC Comics. But everything in the back of these issues, and that's a lot, that's a huge amount of the book, is reprints. From obscure jungle comics that no reader of Tarzan in DC in the 70s would have had access to. Or it would have been very difficult to do. You would have had to go to some sort of collector's show. And that was a far less common thing to do then than it is now. And on top of that, the art nerd fan in me, I gobbled these things up anyway for Superman and Tarzan and pretty much anybody who did this, I gobbled them up. But I also love the fact that you've got Congo Bill and Jungle Detective there at the bottom. And a lot of times the inserts would be drawn by the cover artist. So you would get new artwork. But this was a perfect example. I have basically all of these things. I have all the ones that DC ever made, where you've got an original story at the beginning to sort of lead you off, and then you have a bunch of reprints. Maybe some of the time those issues would have another original story in there. Sometimes those Tarzan issues had an original Korak story, for instance. But Tarzan wasn't the only one that did it. Batman also did. And where you get cover, this is Nick Cardy, the great Nick Cardy, who's also redrawing everything else on the cover. And this of course, the original story is Irv Novick artwork, and this is Batman encountering the Shadow, who tries to give him a gun. He tries to give Batman a gun. He thinks that Batman should be armed, but he's not interested in being armed, and they finally meet. But all the rest of the things in this issue are all older Batman stories from the 30s and 40s. Which, when this came out in the early 1970s, right? This is, you will certainly tell me. Yeah, 1974. This came out in 1974, and in 1974, the opportunity for a Batman reader might have wanted to read those older stories, but the opportunities would have been minuscule. And this afforded them those opportunities. But Marvel has been doing this a long time, too. And for a long time, they had a steady secondary industry of this. For a long time, Marvel had several ongoing series out on the shelves at the drugstore or the bookstore or whatever that only existed to reprint. That's all they were, was reprint. I've got a bunch of them here. Like, for instance, Marvel Tales reprinted Spider-Man. And I remember when these started up, there was Marvel Triple Action for the Avengers. There was Marvel Tales for Spider-Man. We'll see a whole bunch of others. I remember when these started up, I thought, typical Stan Lee. The audience is a bunch of rubes. I'll sell them the same thing twice. And yet I bought these, even though I have the original issues. I bought them anyway. These issues had all new ads in them, which was the whole point for Marvel, but they just reprinted the original issues. And I got them anyway, just because a lot of times they filled out a small week. But sometimes I got them for another reason. Sometimes I got them for a purely practical reason. Like this, for instance, is Marvel's Greatest Comics, which was the book that reprinted the Fantastic Four. So for 20 cents, you would get an old Fantastic Four issue that'd be reprinted. And I bought these because I bought them anyway. I got a lot of these things anyway. I thought it was really kind of interesting that that some of their ongoing books that sold well. These things sold 40 or 50,000 copies every month that they came out, which would be absolutely record-breaking hit now in the comic book industry when comics barely sell 5,000 and they barely ship 5,000. Who knows if they sell anything at all? Does anybody actually buy an issue of Carol Danvers' Captain Marvel? I don't think so. But it wasn't just because I found this interesting. It was also because if I didn't get this, then this was my original issue. Where the cover is coming off, the back cover is coming off. This is what happened. If I didn't get this, then I was stuck. Then I couldn't read the issue at all. Right? back when these things were coming out, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking, if I don't get this, then when this finally gives up the ghost, I won't have any ability to read this at all. I'll just be remembering it. Because at the time, well, let's see. Let's get the information that we need here. This issue of Fantastic Four 55 came out in 1966. And it doesn't have a read left in it. It's just falling apart. Whereas this issue of Marvel's Greatest Comics came out in 1973. So in the 70s, that's what I was thinking. And I wasn't thinking of anything else. I wasn't thinking that there would ever come a time when I would have any alternative. So if I wanted, and I wasn't going to go to some guy's basement in Brooklyn or whatever and get back issues of the Fantastic Four for what seemed like exorbitant money, especially not if Marvel was reprinting the issues. So, because my issues are falling apart. This was Marvel double feature. This reprinted Marvel Tales from Suspense, and this issue highlights another real draw for these things, for Marvel double feature, for World's Greatest Comics, for Marvel Triple Action in a lot of cases, and that is that sometimes they featured original artwork on the cover. Sometimes the cover was original artwork, and that was no small thing. Even at the time these were coming out, this came out in the 1970s as well. 1974. Even at the time when this came out, I was thinking, where will I ever see this cover? If I don't keep it, I'll never see it again. And at the time, really, this is John Romita Sr. Drawing this. At the time, I really, really enjoyed his artwork, and it meant something to me that I was seeing an original piece of artwork that I wouldn't see anywhere else. Same thing with, for instance, the Human Torch. This is the Fantastic Four's Human Torch. Johnny Storm had his own comic book for a while, and it always had older Human Torch stories in the front that were reprints. The Human Torch had an active backup feature for a long time. But then in the back, there would also be reprints of the original Human Torch and Toro, his teenage sidekick. Johnny Storm is a human teenager who gets irradiated by cosmic rays and becomes the Human Torch. The original Human Torch from World War II was an android who could burst into flame and control flames and fly like that. And both Human Torches fought Prince Namor the Submariner. I'm sorry, Namor. Both fought the Submariner in their time, because the Submariner's been around for a long time. Wakanda Forever will probably bury him forever, but he's been around for a long time. And so this is another example of what Marvel could do. The Human Torch these comics were reprints. But again, a lot of people, if they happen to see Tales of Suspense or whatever and maybe get a Johnny Storm backup feature, they certainly would not have any access to the original Human Torch backup features. But there's also a case of just, even if my original series is in good shape, still getting them anyway because I'm a sucker. Like, for instance, Marvel recently had these True Believer issues that were only $1. Clearly, they were, in this case, they weren't designed to familiarize the reader with lore in order to increase their loyalty. Instead, they were designed to link somehow to some theatrical product that Marvel had, in this case, Skrulls, for the Carol Danvers Captain Marvel movie. But I got this, even though my original issue of this is still in fine shape. This can still be read for quite some time. I had this anyway. I got this even so, just because I'm a bit of a sucker for these sorts of things. But we're not just talking comic books, because eventually Marvel and DC realized that they could do books as well. That books of reprints would also sell. Gradually, they started to realize that it isn't just kids who are buying these comics, that their audience is growing up. And the typical yardstick that was true for a long time in America, let's hope that it's still a little bit true, is that the older you get, the more disposable income you have. You certainly aren't on somebody's allowance anymore. And the powers that be at these comic book companies eventually realized that they could sort of bank on that they could market to that with books. I want to show you two examples of Marvel and DC both doing this fairly early. Marvel did these Treasury editions, these huge oversized things with original cover artwork. That is a gorgeous John Romita Sr. cover of Spider-Man and a back cover of Spider-Man. That artwork exists nowhere else. Well, now it does. Now this will be captured in an Omnibus edition. But at the time, I remember seeing this and thinking, I had to convince the dry goods store owner to get this in. He had no idea what it was. All he knew was that it was 5 times as big as a comic book, and he wasn't sure he knew what to do with it. I told him, this will sell out. If you get 3 of these, they'll sell out even at $1.50 a piece. And he did, and they did. But I remember when I saw this the first time, I thought, well, what if I want that cover artwork? I'm never going to see it any other way. It's never going to appear. These aren't, the cover's original to this, but the inside is all reprints of Spider-Man. Old reprints from the Ditko era, all the way up to the modern time with Ross Andru artwork at the time. Because this came out in the 70s as well. Yes? Yeah, 1974. See, so that's original artwork. That's original artwork. And also these character faces for the table of contents. That's all original. That's John Romita Sr. drawing these characters that he did so much to put his stamp on. So that was Marvel did a bunch of these, and they did really well. They exhibited a quality that we have seen on Epic Comic Book Wednesdays, the 3 of you that watch these videos, we've seen that one quality of these things doesn't go away. And it was demonstrated by, Marvel had these big treasure editions, and so did DC Comics. For Batman, Superman, the Justice League, Wonder Woman especially. And one of the qualities that we saw in these things that was totally unexpected, Marvel and DC did not see it coming, is that these things themselves would become collectible. Even though they had no original content except for the cover, the presentation. They still became collectible. So that if you didn't get the Power of Shazam, the Captain Marvel DC Treasury Edition, if you didn't get it when it was first printed, good luck getting it for the next 10 years. You'd have to find a copy at a convention or somebody was selling because it sold out and Marvel didn't reprint anymore. That quality we're going to see stayed true. But that was Marvel. And here I want to show you, I don't have an example right here of a DC Treasury Edition, but DC also took a leap towards hardcovers. They did these. They did Batman this is from the 30s to the 70s. There's a Carmine Infantino cover, but the cover is reprinted too. No original stuff in here at all. They did a big hardcover volume of this for Batman and Wonder Woman and Superman, and they sold. This was, what, are you going to even tell me? You're probably not going to even tell me. This volume came out in 1971. And it's not listed on the cover here, but this would probably have been about $5, which is a lot of money. Unthinkable. When I was getting into comics, I got into comics about 15 years before there was a Marvel Comics, and was avidly reading the real comics: Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, the Justice League, and the Legion of Superheroes, Superboy, and his dog, Crypto. I was avidly reading those, and then Marvel came along. But even in all that time, if you'd said to me, in my most adventurous mind frame, that books were coming, I wouldn't have believed it. I would have said, who would buy them? Little even realizing that even at the time, I would have answered that question by saying, I would certainly buy that. Well, I can't be alone. And it turns out I wasn't. So these things sold, and they are not made anymore. So you have to go and find them. So all these reprint things have that quality. Whereas which is that if you don't jump on them, they become collectible. This was an education for Marvel and DC, and they jumped on it and started pumping out the reprint volumes. I want to show you 2 more here. I'll leave a link to Michael's video down below. He showed you a couple of these. Marvel and DC both instituted hardcover reprint volumes that were numbered, sequential, looked to be thorough. Marvel did the Masterworks series. These weren't cheap. These were relatively thin volumes. They were $75 a piece or more. Unthinkable to those of us back here. Unthinkable that anyone would ever pay that for comic books. And I don't think I ever did. My local comic book shop, Newbury Comics, used to have a really, really robust remainder section. And they got a lot of old Masterworks editions in remainders, so that I'd be able to get them for $20 or $15 or something like that. I don't think I ever paid full price for these. But these were coming out in the 1990s, I believe. Is that right? Okay, this was $50 when it came out in the 1980s. That was a huge amount of money. And these just kept coming. These are still happening. the Marvel Masterworks series are still happening. They're still coming out in a steady, stately pace, purely chronological, where you would flip it over and see what's inside, and you would, if you are a Marvel fan, you would have these original issues. I have these issues, but this is infinitely more durable. It's revisitable. You can go at it without having it torn to pieces. And DC did the same thing with their archive editions. These things, where it very much showed you the same thing. It was very much along the lines of Marvel Masterworks series. They were also numbered. This is the Shazam family. There was also, I believe, a whole run of these things for Captain Marvel himself. A ton of them for Superman. A ton of them for Batman. There was Batman, Detective Comics, Dark Knight, a million others, designed to reflect the profusion of Batman comics. Just whole shelves of them. But also everybody else. Adam Strange, Green Lantern, you name it, Hawkman. The Hawkman volume is, as far as I know, the only volume that reprints the Joe Kubert era of Hawkman. DC brought these out. These also were fairly pricey. This is $50 back in the 80s. And I don't think DC makes their archive editions anymore. I think they just let it lapse. Marvel keeps going. And when they make a Marvel Masterworks volume, it sells. It sells out. And you might think, well, okay, that's odd. Why would one company keep doing it and the other one not? Well, that is a long-standing complaint in Epic Comic Book Wednesday, right? But Michael and I both said the DC Comics idea of their reprint culture has fallen by the wayside. It's a fraction of what Marvel's is. And that's crazy. Because there are two main factors driving the health of the reprint industry in comic books. One is what I mentioned, that the fans who know they love this stuff also have a little bit of disposable income. They could be disposing of it better, but it doesn't matter. They at least have it. If you offer the item, they'll pre-order it and buy it. That's one element of what drives the health of the reprint culture. And Marvel and DC both like money. And the other element that drives the health of the reprint culture is that nothing in comic books today is worth reading. It's all Twitter politics, virtue signaling, with only a tiny handful of exceptions. Mark Waid, right now, oddly enough, is doing a really good run on a new edition of World's Finest, Superman and Batman teaming up every month. Really, really good stuff. One of the only four-color floppy comic books that's actually coming out every month that's worth buying every month. But most of it, it's drawn by computer. It looks like it's written by computer for computers. It's just horrible. Absolute Twitter virtue signaling, nonstop. So fans presented with that when they go to the comic shop, well, I'm not going to buy any of this swill. They're flocking to reprint culture. And that, given that those two factors are true and that Marvel and DC both know they're true, it's odd that DC isn't flooding the zone. There ought to be a new, really nice, desirable DC reprint volume every week. There is at least one desirable, high-quality Marvel reprint volume every single week. There ought to be that for DC. They have twice the inventory. But there are also paperback things. We have, DC did the showcase editions, which were, you got a lot for your money. This thing was $20, and you got a huge amount of content. These were big, fat volumes. But they were cheap because they were in black and white. You lost the color. And in this case, you don't want to see Jerry Ordway's artwork without color. You don't want to see any of this without color. But it was a nice, cheap way. DC Comics made a huge number of these things across a wide variety of things. If they could get all the way to All-Star Squadron, you know that they were pretty much reprinting everything. And fans ate it up. And I heard from a number of fans, young fans, who said that one of the reasons they were eating it up is because it gave them a chance to get acquainted with the huge backlog, the history of the comics that they were reading at the time. This was 20 years ago. That's still true. So, and once again, I point out, this goes all throughout this issue, that these things became collectible. On their own, they became collectible. Same thing as we've already seen with Marvel's Epic collections. These are in full color. They are a little bit more. These things, the showcase editions were $20 a piece. These things are twice that. Right? This isn't. Yeah, this is 40, so they're twice that, but boy, oh boy, you get your money's worth. This has almost everything that you could ask for. It doesn't have the house ads or the letters pages, but it has everything in full color, including lots of additional stuff. Well, if there's any additional stuff to be included, they include it in the back. That's That's fairly wonderful. This has not brand Eck. There is Lyndon Johnson. And a whole bunch of other people that you have to be really old to recognize. But they include little bits and pieces like that. And we've already seen on this channel on our Epic Comic Book Wednesdays that Epic collections get expensive. If you don't get them, they go out of print. And then the older out of print editions become expensive. The same thing is true with showcase editions, or Marvel did the Essentials line. There was the same thing, just big fat volumes in black and white. Some of those volumes are expensive to buy because they went out of print and stayed out of print. Same thing is true with the Epic collections. You really have to, if you want them, you really have to jump on them because you don't know how many Marvel will print and you don't know how long they'll be around. And the minute they're not around anymore, the collector freaks will just grab them up. And we'll finish up here with two things. One that I want to finish up with is something that I don't have an example in front of me. I'm not sure how well it would come out on camera anyway, and that is digital comics. My iPad has thousands and thousands and thousands of digital comics. We've seen them on Epic Comic Book Wednesday. They have the advantage of being infinitely portable. Of course, they're infinitely storable. You don't need boxes or anything, or shelf space. And you can also pinch the artwork. You can expand the artwork, which is really great in a lot of cases. But there's those, but then there's also these. These enormous omnibus editions. Enormous things that usually have originally commissioned cover artwork, on the front cover anyway, and that are all in full color. And these often do have the original house ads and letter columns. They're literally a page-by-page, detail reprint of these issues. And you get a lot for, I don't think this will have the price listed on it. This was $100. And you get a lot for that. You get everything for that. If you watch Michael's video, the truly horrifying part of his video is when he goes to the Vault of Comics and you see how many of these things he has. Good Lord. The joists of his floors must be groaning. Same thing, Marvel did the same thing with these big things, these big Marvel Omnibus editions. This is the Savage Sword of Conan, and this has everything in it. It has all of the issues and the letters columns and the house ads, just everything. Amazing. If these weren't so inhospitable to reading and to porting around, I'd have a ton of these things. But the secondhand market, they can get pricey. If they've gone out of print, they can get pricey. So there's an active reprint culture out there. It's just, this is a rare instance in which Michael and I are on the same page in bemoaning the fact that DC Comics doesn't have the same life to their reprint culture as Marvel does. I think in his video, Michael moans about Silver Age Hawkman. I myself am thinking about the apparently irresolvable conflict to get me 10 of these omnibus editions of Superboy. not gay Superboy, not clone Superboy, but Clark Kent when he was a teenager. Superboy, who was one of the best-selling comic book characters in the world for 30 years. I would like a whole set of omnibus editions of him. I don't think I'm ever going to get them. But there are lots and lots of others, too, that DC can produce and just isn't. As far as I know, they don't seem to care so much. It's literally money hanging there to be made. Because the audience is built in for these things. They'll sell. Especially Legion stuff. And in DC's defense, there have been a lot of Legion reprint volumes. They had these showcase volumes. They went up well into the double digits. These archive editions, they went well into the double digits for the Legion. And they also are up to 3 big omnibus volumes of the classic Legion that includes everything. And also little hardcover editions of reprint of the Legion. I don't think it's any surprise. It's no mystery that that's happening with the Legion before it's happening with lots of other DC properties, because the Legion fans have demonstrated that for 60 years. They will buy what you give them. But we can hope for better. In the meantime, there's the digital route, which is a vast treasure trove. It's not quite the same tactile experience, but as you saw from some of those individual comics of mine, some of these individual comics can be tactile a little too much. In which case, you're out. You don't have it anymore. Whereas that doesn't happen with digital items. But anyway, that's our Epic Comic Book Wednesday for today. It's reprint culture. How do you learn the backlog of the stories that you're liking? Of course, right now, you're not liking any of the stories that are coming out in Marvel or DC. But you might still be idly curious about the 70 years that Batman's been having adventures. There are many ways to go about it, but a lot of it's going to be expensive. So if you're interested, there are websites and YouTube channels devoted to reprint culture. you should look them up and keep abreast and jump on what looks interesting that week, rather than act on the assumption that it'll be around in a year. But anyway, that's our comic book subject for today. Nice, neat 30 minutes of nattering. But I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.